Welcome to This Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here. Today, we're diving straight into something we all take completely for granted, the spaces we live in. We're going to trace this massive, honestly, mind-bending shift in how human beings make things. We went from literally just scraping together physical shelters to survive, right up to designing these invisible, hyper-complex networks that actually govern how we live our lives.
So I want you to do something for me real quick. Just look around the room you're sitting in right now. Check out the walls, the doors, the windows. Now ask yourself, is this building just a passive shelter keeping the rain off your head? Or is it something way more active? Like, is it actually a machine, a kind of invisible apparatus that's subtly guiding, organizing, and controlling your behavior? By the time we wrap up, I promise you, you're gonna look at your own home in a totally different way.
Okay, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the origins of techne. 2, architecture as an apparatus. 3, the apparatusized turn. 4, the building as surface. And finally, number 5, reconnecting with nature.
Our whole exploration today is anchored in this incredibly insightful academic text by Sang Lee. It's called Techne and Dispositive of Architecture. Now, what makes Lee's work so fantastic is how he takes these really dense, heavy theoretical concepts from philosophers like Michel Foucault and Martin Heidegger and totally demystifies them. He actually translates all that high-level theory directly into how our physical, everyday built environments function.
All right, part 1, the origins of techne. To really understand where we are today, we kind of have to start at the beginning. Back in ancient Greece, the whole concept of making was called techne. But here's the thing, techne wasn't about sitting in some pristine office dreaming up abstract geometric shapes. Not at all. It was deeply rooted in raw material production. It was a shared physical effort. In fact, the absolute master of techne was known as a tekton, which literally just means a skilled carpenter who built these woven wood houses. Architecture back then was purely about this hands-on physical crafting of materials right there in the mud. You learned it, you practiced it, and you definitely got your hands dirty. Moving right along to part 2, architecture as an apparatus. So building from that literal physical carpentry of the ancient Greeks, we suddenly enter this world of invisible, overarching systems. And this brings us to the 20th century philosopher Michel Foucault and his big concept of the dispositif, which basically translates to apparatus. Now, let's bust this jargon, right? An apparatus isn't a mechanical gear or a physical tool you can hold. It's an active system of relations. Think of it like a hidden net that captures and organizes human life. Foucault argued that an apparatus performs what he called a dominant strategic function. When you apply that to architecture, it means buildings are not just piles of bricks and glass. They're actually active, functional systems designed to order masses of people, dictate how we move, and fundamentally control our behavior. And when you look at this, notice just how incredibly expansive and capturing this apparatus truly is. When we say architecture is an apparatus, the physical building, the architectural form itself, is literally just one tiny piece of this massive tangled web. It's all completely bound up with institutions, regulatory decisions, zoning laws, discourses, administrative measures, the whole shebang. You actually can't separate the physical walls of, say, a prison or a hospital or even your local office building from the laws and social norms that force them to be built in the first place. The building is basically just the physical manifestation of all those invisible rules. Foucault actually mapped out this timeline to show how human spatial development evolved into this giant apparatus. So back in the Middle Ages, we had emplacement. Basically, everything had a very fixed, strict physical place in the hierarchy. Then, jumping to the 17th century, thanks to thinkers like Galileo, we shifted to extension, this big realization that space is infinite and just keeps extending outward. But today, in our contemporary era, we live in the space of the site. Today's architecture isn't about fixed places anymore. It's all about storing data, managing traffic flows, and organizing the relationships between different points. It's like a giant puzzle. We live in this world of networks, and our buildings are really just nodes plugged into that network. Which brings us to part 3, the apparatized turn. This whole realization highlights a massive historical shift in how buildings actually got designed. Sang Lee's text points out 2 vastly different ways of making. On one side, we have autogenic techne. That's our ancient Greek carpenter, right? The designer and the builder are the exact same person. They're crafting the building directly on the physical site, reacting to the mud, the sun, the materials, all in real time. But then, on the flip side, we have allogenic techne, and this is where the architect completely steps away from the messy reality of the construction site.
The architect becomes this author of virtual abstract instructions, blueprints, CAD drawings, creating everything from afar. And the crazy thing is, this wasn't just some random accident. It was driven by a new piece of technology. Back in the 15th century, when Bruno Leschi developed perspectival projection, it literally changed the entire game. Suddenly, architects didn't have to lay the bricks themselves. They could just sit in a studio, draw these abstract lines on a piece of paper, and encode their ideas into a set of instructions. The architect completely transformed from a hands-on constructor into an author of a spatial apparatus. Architecture became highly conceptual and, frankly, deeply abstracted from the physical earth.
All right, part 4, the building as surface.
So because architecture turned into this abstract apparatus, Sang Lee points out that we really need to look at the physical boundaries of these buildings, the walls, the facades, and fundamentally rethink what they're actually doing. Think about a standard wall. Most of us just see it as a dumb barrier, right? It keeps the outside out and the inside in. But the philosopher Avram Stroll talks about this idea called the Leonardo surface, named after Da Vinci. This concept argues that a surface isn't just a dividing line made of bulk material. It's an active interface. Think about the surface of a lake. Sure, it separates the air from the water, but it is also the exact precise place where the air and water connect and interact. A building's facade shouldn't just be a dead barrier. It should be this empathetic, active interface that actually mediates between our interior lives and the exterior environment.
And Gilles Deleuze's concept of the fold pushes this idea even further. Instead of picturing a hard, rigid wall, imagine the architectural enclosure as a fold, like a living, breathing skin. The fold acts as a completely smooth, continuous transition. It's permeable, it fluctuates, and it adapts. It weaves the inside and the outside together. This idea completely changes a building from being some closed-off defensive fortress into a sensitive organism that dynamically responds to the world around it. It's a real game changer. Finally, we've made it to part 5, reconnecting with nature. Okay, so we've seen how architecture became this conceptual apparatus and how its walls can actually be active surfaces. But how exactly has this heavily apparatized architecture alienated us from the natural world? And more importantly, how do we fix it? Well, to really grasp the problem, we have to look at Martin Heidegger and his honestly pretty pessimistic concept of Gestell, which roughly translates to inframing. Heidegger warned us that modern technology, and by extension modern architecture, doesn't view nature as something beautiful or self-emerging. Instead, it sees nature purely as a standing reserve. Basically, we treat nature like a giant, disposable warehouse. To this mindset, a forest isn't a complex, living ecology. It's just a reserve of timber waiting to be chopped. A mountain is just a reserve of stone. Our modern apparatus completely subjugates the natural world solely to serve human convenience. And this mindset leads to a pretty grim reality in modern design. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek uses this really striking, almost eerie metaphor for it. He describes a multitude of organs without a body, machines of jouissance. Now, jouissance means this extreme, almost painful excess of pleasure. When we build bad modern architecture, we are essentially just building these selfish machines, organs without a body, whose only real purpose is to satisfy human excess, comfort, and pleasure at all costs. We just slap on bigger air conditioners, massive glass facades, and tons of synthetic materials, artificially propping up this atrophying relationship with nature just to keep our little pleasure machines running. So how on earth do we fix this? Well, some architects try this thing called biomimetics, but there is absolutely a good way and a bad way to go about it. Bad biomimetics is literally just copying how nature looks. Making a skyscraper shaped like a giant flower, or slapping a decorative green wall onto a massive casino while you're still secretly subjugating the environment to serve human excess. But true mimesis, drawing from thinkers like Walter Benjamin and Jacques Derrida, that is all about empathy. It's not about making a building look like a leaf. It's about actually participating in the operations of nature. It's about creating a building that genuinely behaves like an ecosystem, finding a real self-sustaining relationship with the environment it sits in. And that brings us to one final, profound question. As we go forward and continue to construct the apparatuses of tomorrow, will our future human-built ecologies just keep blindly dominating nature, treating it like a standing reserve warehouse? Or will we actually learn to sympathetically mimic nature's operations, transforming our buildings into empathetic, breathing surfaces? I want you to look around your room just one more time. Ask yourself, what kind of machine are you sitting inside of right now? And what kind of machine do you want for the future? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll see you next time.